my parents were basically Bombay people, and I don't know whether this can be called a value, but my father was very clear that he would never be an absentee landlord. So for him to move here was not an easy decision from Mumbai. My mother used to say that she would get very annoyed when my father would bring a guest home in the evening unannounced, because even for a loaf of bread she had to send the driver all the way to town. So we are about 45 minutes from Pune. So that is the kind of life they adapted to come and live here, because the plant was going to be here, people were going to be here. So he felt the right thing to do is to live amidst them. And that is why this story has been told many times about how, so I have a brother and a sister, I am the oldest. So how three of us grew up here in the same colony, playing with all the kids, as I like to say, from the chairman to the watchman, walking across this highway which was not so busy, across the stream in which the buffaloes would bathe, going to the same school everybody went to. And I have to say, somehow a very early memory that stuck in my mind is that of how the missionaries of the Society of Saint Ursula, who actually came from Switzerland to set up the school, they would start the day by bathing all the children, you know. So class started with a bath, and I still have a vivid memory of a wall with taps, you know, and kids sitting under the tap and the sisters washing them. So not a bad lesson with all this virus around even today, that how important hygiene is. So education started like that. So that was really a case of simple living. And I think we grew up here, the business grew. I think over 200 families lived in the colony. So you had 1,000 friends to play with. So life was good. The most vivid memory of those times, I have to say, was in 1979, when the labor unrest led to a big strike or lockout. You know, in those days, labor management was a big part of business. Now, thankfully, things have changed. I think management and labor, and anyway, we don't see that division anymore so clearly, have both become very progressive in the drive to be globally competitive. But at that time, I guess everybody thought, company का तो 10 साल का waiting period है. So what's in it for me? You know, why should I work harder? Why should I do better? You know. So anyway, strikes, lockouts, unrest was very common. But this time in 1979, it got out of hand. I remember a lot of sporadic incidents of violence, etc. started taking place. I remember when my father used to be home at dinner, he used to get a call from his colleagues saying it's time to declare a lockout. Lockout is something that management declares. A strike is an option that workmen exercise. So they wanted to declare a lockout because there was a lot of violence on the shop floor. You know, scooters are made with big metal parts, and those were being flung around, machines were being damaged, stuff like that. But my father was of the view that, you know, that should be a last resort, because once you shut something down, then getting it started again is a long drawn process. So he was trying to resist that, strike the right balance. So I was privy to some of those conversations. And then finally one evening I remember, so outside the bedroom that my brother and I shared, there was a little balcony. And my mother would sit there every morning, have her tea, and watch us or watch over us as we got ready to go to school. You know, she was a very middle-class Maharashtrian lady. So for her, that was the normal thing to do. And so here we were in the evening actually. The sun had set. I would say it must be about 7:38. And from there at that time, you know, the trees and all were not so big. So you had a clear sight to my father's office, which I would say was perhaps 400 meters, say half a kilometer away from our house. So I don't know if my sister was there, but my brother and I were there, my mother was there. It was very eerie because it was very calm. All this traffic was not there. You could see the stars. And you could see that the office was on fire, because it had been set on fire. There's no mobile phones that day. So occasionally he would call to say, it's okay, they have lit a fire and all that sort of stuff. And stones were coming through his glass window. But he had security around him, our own security, guards. So we were sure he's reasonably safe. But to watch this, it's like watching a war, mini war, from your own balcony. And this is not what you would think would be associated with scooter making. But the irony of the situation was that we had a maid servant. Her name was Hirabai. She was quite elderly as well. She was older than my mother. And she had looked after us since the day we were born. So she was like a second mother to us. Hirabai's son, I forget his name, his second name was Dhumal, was a worker in the factory. We had given him a job in the factory. So now there was this conflict in my mind that what is right and wrong, and what side am I supposed to be on? Because on the one hand, my father may be in danger. So is that bunch wrong? On the other hand, if tomorrow the police were to open fire, as they did eventually, that was the first and last time such an incident took place, and two or three people were killed in the police firing. So if the police were to fire, and if Hirabai's son died, then how do you deal with that? How do you live with that? So I pondered this, and I remember asking my mother, and she was standing and she was watching this thing, and her face was like expressionless. So I said to her, what is right and wrong in this? And she said, in times like this, there is no point asking anybody. Nobody's going to tell you, or nothing's going to tell you what's right or wrong. And there is a voice within each of us, which is called our conscience. And you have to just close your eyes and listen to that voice, and you will know what is right, what is wrong. So I would say this was a big life lesson, for me. So I would say that's one of the first and one of the most impactful memories of my childhood. Growing up in a business environment amongst people of all strata, if I may say that, and how there can be a conflict which leaves a lasting impression on your mind. So this would be, I would say, something that I will always remember, and something I have shared with my own son, actually. So it didn't end there. So a couple of days later, I think, there was this police firing. It was very sad because in all these things, it's always those who are innocent who suffer, actually. So of the people killed, there was the colony, as we say, we live in the colony. There was the colony Bania. So everybody loved the Bania, because everybody went there to get their atta pisoed and their groceries, and we went to steal the toffees and that sort of thing. So this Bania Kaka was there. And this idiot did not realize the gravity of the situation. So the main gate that you came in through was here. And he was loitering on the road somewhere. He must have gone for getting something. And he saw that there's a big crowd, the police were not letting people enter. So he thought he was clever by half, and he would come in through the fence. And there was an inspector called Inspector Sankoli, who told me this story himself. And he said, I saw this guy 100 meters down the line trying to get in, and I didn't know who he was. I thought he was going to play some mischief. And he said, I told my policeman, now. And that was it, on the spot. Unfortunately, they didn't shoot him in the leg. Wherever they shot him, I don't know, but he died on the spot. Similarly, one of the workmen that was killed, his nephew, his sister's son, Vitthal Padale, I still remember the name, was in my class. Here you are next day in class, both of you sitting. I remember he was a very good fast bowler on the cricket team. So we were on the same cricket team, we were in the same class, same division, and he just lost his uncle, So these are very difficult questions in life to encounter so early, I would say. So that would be one of, I would say, my earliest remarkable memories. So there was nothing untoward in class, Nobody looked at me as if I was to blame for something. Everybody was at ease, from whatever I remember. Eventually, like all things, this too passed. But I would say it's not so important who thought what or who said what. The important thing is your own experience. Now, whether you call it guilt, regret, confusion, anxiety, these are not nice things to experience in the context of something so grave, I would say. So what remains with you actually is that experience. That is why Maya Angelou says the world is made not of atoms, but stories. So it is the stories that remain. So we used to all play soccer because soccer was my game, so we used to play soccer in the evening on the field we have here. And about half the people playing would be the security guards, who would be about 40-45 years of age. And my father always believed that because of incidents like this, he was conditioned to believe that guards must not come locally so that they can be more neutral. So half of our guards came from Rajasthan and the other half came from Nepal. And that continues, I think, more or less even till today. So we used to play, all the kids and the guards, everybody used to play together. It used to be quite vigorous, it used to be good fun, etc. So in 1987, my family decided to make a movie on my great-grandfather, Jamnalal Bajaj, who was said to be the fifth son or adopted son of Gandhi. The name of the movie was Kathni Karni Ek Si. And quite embarrassingly, I think if you go to YouTube, it is still there. And it's not funny to see me in that movie. So in that, it's not really a movie, it's a documentary, about 45 minutes long. And they needed a narrator, or sutradhar as it was called, through it. So they made a bakra out of me, convinced me to be that. As I realized later, it was not necessary for somebody from the family to play that role. But the director, there was a Bhimsenji, he was keen on this. And my uncle and aunt basically bulldozed me into it. The movie was called Kathni Karni Ek Si, which means as is your talk, so should be your walk. That was what Jamnalalji's principle was. And this was to be shot in Sikar, outside of, I think, a 2-hour drive outside of Jaipur, which is where he was born. So we had to go there, which is a story by itself, because it was a pain in the butt to drive from Jaipur. We got lost in the desert, we ran out of fuel. I mean, that's another story. But the more important story is that when we got there, I was shocked to see where, quote unquote, we came from, because it was just a mud house. It was a very small mud house, at least up until 1987. And when I walked into it, I couldn't even walk erect. I had to bend down because the arches were low, etc. And it had been still maintained by the village in honor of his memory. And I actually remember going to the room where he was born. He was born there, and there was still a candle lit over there, and his photograph was there. So I was very touched to see that. So I think we did some shooting over there. And then we had to go to a village well, and we had to shoot over there. So because the village well was a community place where people would gather, etc. So we said we will shoot there. So I remember that evening at about 5 going there, and I saw a familiar face. So there's a guy called Subhash who was a security guard. So I said to him, what are you doing here? तुम इधर क्या कर रहे हो, Subhash? So he said, Baba, मैं भी इसी गांव का हूँ. He said, I'm also from the same village. So I said, oh, okay. So I said, how come? So he said, no, I mean, I joined the company a long time back, and I have come here for the summer vacations. So once a year they used to go back. And I asked him, so where is your home? So he says, आज आप shooting कर रहे थे ना जमनालाल जी के घर पे? I said, yes. He said, you were shooting at Jamnalalal ji's house. I'm your neighbor. And this was a life-changing moment for me, because I knew the story that Jamnalalal ji was actually born into a very, very poor family. He was one of many kids, and his parents were very poor. And he happened to be at the age of 4 playing outside in the courtyard in the middle of the day with the blazing sun. And that was what my cousin was going to act out. That's why I knew this. And he had turned pink in the sun. And there was a Sethji who was about 60 years old. His name was Bajaj Bajaj, who in his fancy carriage was going past, horse carriage. And Sethji had no kids. And he saw this child and he felt there is something special about this child. So he walked up, knocked on the door, and Jamnalalji's mother opened the door. Is how the story goes. And as is custom, she offered water. To which then I asked her that, whose child is this? And in a manner of speaking figuratively, she said, Tharo hi hai in Marwadi. I believe that means it's like your child. You know, it's the way you say it with affection. He said, okay, then I am taking the child. So she was aghast. So she called her husband. And so he asked what has happened, and she said, look, this is what has happened, he's taking the child away. To which apparently the husband said that the word once given has to be honored. That is the genesis of Kathni Karni Eksi. That once you have said something, you must honor that word. So he said, okay, you can take the child. So the mother was just completely shocked. Then the father was able to collect his wits. He asked the father that, in return, what can I give you? So the father said, we are not selling the child. It's just that, we already made a promise, so we are just keeping our word. But nevertheless, the women in the village have to walk a long distance every day to get water. So it would help a lot if you would commission and fund a well for this village. To which he agreed. That is how that well came about. And that is why we went to shoot there at that well. And then at that well I met Subhash only to learn, to put it simply, that if his grandfather had been playing outside that day, as I say to everyone, I would have been a security guard in Bajaj Auto, and Subhash may well have been the chairman of Bajaj Auto. So this told me that circumstances are much, much bigger than us. Anyone who thinks that, you call it ego or whatever, but if you feel that you know it, you have not only can do it, you have done it. This whole concept that I have done it, this is mine, why it is wrong is because circumstances are so much bigger than you that where you are is purely luck by chance. Of course, within that, how you conduct yourself, etc., that's a important but minor detail. But if we have to consider as a family, or if I have to consider as a person, why I am here, I can keep talking about lineage, heritage, grandfather, great-grandfather, father, Harvard Business School, engineering degree, meritocracy and all that. It's all rubbish. I am here because my great-grandfather was playing marbles in the courtyard one afternoon. And somebody happened to be passing by. He was very wealthy. That is how the family came into wealth. So that was a very impactful story for me. But over and above experiences like this, I think it came fundamentally from my mother, because she came from as I said, from a middle-class Maharashtrian family. Her father worked for the British. He was very accomplished. He was, I believe, the chairman of the Bombay Port Trust till he retired. So, a very educated family, a family with very high integrity in every sense. And I think those values she brought into an otherwise, if I may say so, somewhat aristocratic, wealthy family. So I think that was a huge sobering influence on all the kids growing up. Because as is not unusual, I mean, the influence of the father is limited. It is the mother that is conditioning your thinking. So whether it was about going to the same school as everyone else, in the same uniform, in the same bus. If you miss the bus, the car doesn't take you, you walk to school. So we had a lunch break, I still remember, it used to be from 12:40 to 1:15. It was very short. And half the kids used to bring their tiffin with them, but for a lot of us, our parents used to send it because school was just 2 minutes away. So our tiffin used to come, and there was a common area where everybody's tiffin would be dumped. And I don't know how we found it. I mean, it was before all this dabbawala business happened in Mumbai. But every kid, like a homing pigeon, found where his tiffin was. So I remember when the bell used to ring, 12:40, probably a few hundred kids used to run out to this common area, grab their tiffin, go quickly eat in 10 minutes, dump the tiffin and go to play. You know, the whole idea was to go to play. And it used to be so embarrassing for me because everybody else's tiffin was like a single tiffin. So my tiffin had like 4 dabbas on it, you know. So there was soup, there was rice or roti, there was dal, there was sabji, and maybe there was dahi also, I don't know. So I used to have this little tower of pisa over there, and everybody else's dabba used to be like this. To pick that up in front of everyone else, take it back, and then on your desk, you know, you have to lay it out like one 5-course meal and eat it, was a very embarrassing experience for me. So I think this came from my mother somewhere. So I always preferred to walk. If we went for a scouts camp to school, I would be the first one to start cutting the weeds and all. I was very happy and comfortable with that. And I think that is why even later on, so we were here until 10th grade, so till we were 15 or so. So I think that is why later on for me, whether it was to study at College of Engineering here, whether it was to live in the dorm with shared toilets in the UK for my masters, whether it was to start working on the shop floor here for the first 5 years with engineers like myself. I mean, it was just part of my nature, you know. It was not something I had to think about and make myself do, because that is how we grew up. You know. So it was wonderful. I mean, we climbed all the trees, we fell off the trees, we played gilli danda, we ate those flowers that I don't know what they are called. We plucked the grass which had the little arrowhead on it, and we attacked each other. So that was a great life. Yeah, wonderful. I tell you a story with Sanjeev. With Sunaina, so she's the youngest. So I think all of us, she's the one that we are most fond of now. But growing up, you know how boys are. They say boys are what? A lot of noise with some dirt on them, right? So 2 boys versus a girl was always trouble for her. I think we bullied her a lot. As far as Sanjeev and I were concerned, I tell you a story which is important, I think, in the context of today's times. So we used to go to Bombay for Diwali breaks and summer breaks. And I remember once that, so we had this trusty old ambassador that would break down at least 3 times, definitely on the ghats. And it was all part of the game, you know. And I think Sanjeev would always get sick. He had motion sickness. So he would always be throwing up, going up and down the ghats, is what I remember. If I'm wrong, then he's going to be pissed off, but this is what I remember. And I remember once, we were coming from Mumbai. Again, there's no expressway, there's no mobile phones, you know, there's none of that. We're coming from Mumbai in this ambassador, daytime, just 2 of us and our driver. And we used to love it, you know. It used to take 4 hours, and it was a nice drive. So we're coming, and so I said to the driver, "Arey, mast, abhi acha drive hai, acha lag raha hai," something I said to him. And he said to me, I was sitting in the front, Sanjeev was sitting behind. He said, "Baba, आपको अंदाज नहीं है मेरे ऊपर कितनी बड़ी जिम्मेदारी है." You know. And I never thought of it, that the 2 sons of Rahul Bajaj are being driven by this driver who is going to be out of touch with my parents for the next 4 hours, at least, till he gets here, in not the most reliable car in the world, you know, on not the safest roads of the world. I never thought of it. The reason this story is remarkable is not only to convey how simply our parents brought us up. You know, I mean, today I would not, my son is 21 now, but if he was like I was probably 12 at that time, would I send him off? I would not. I mean, even now when he goes out in a car with a driver, you know, he gets mad at me because I'm messaging him every hour. I need to know where he is, what is he doing, is he okay, you know, that kind of thing. So I don't know whether parents were braver or simpler, or the environment was such that they did not have to worry. And the reason I'm telling you this story is because the driver's name was Hussain. So, I mean, in today's times, with all this stuff going around, and I tell people that for me it was amazing, because when we grew up, the driver that we spent all our time with when we were traveling was Hussain. At College of Engineering, and before that at St. Vincent's in high school, 11th and 12th. My closest friend was Zohair, Akolawala. When my son grew up, the maid that looked after him was Hasina. And there's one more I'm forgetting. So I remember this story particularly nowadays, when there is all this strife in our country created about one community versus the other, that my parents didn't think twice. See, Hindu-Muslim is not a new thing. It has always been there for 70 years. But my parents did not think twice before sending two of their children off with Sayyid Hussain to Pune for 4 hours in Ambassador. So like my mother and I have always been crazy about dogs. When we had our first dog called Bunty, he was a golden retriever, and how when he was sick, and I think that was also in 79, when my father was under tremendous stress because of this labor issue. And Bunty, I remember, had gastro, so he was passing blood. And the vet had come and seen him in the evening, and he was only getting worse, he was sliding. And he did what dogs do in such a situation. They leave the house, they go outside, because they don't like to die in the house. So they go into the garden, and they will usually clench their mouth, perhaps in pain, we don't know. So my mother called up my father. Maybe it was about 8 or 9 o'clock. He was still in office because he was very preoccupied those days. And she said to him, look, you have to come now. We have to take him to the vet in Pune because he has come out, he has clenched his teeth. And we were just dog crazy completely, my mother and I. And this was a very young dog in this was perhaps a couple of years later in 81. So he was just about 2 years old, I think, 2 or 3 years old. So he came, I mean, he was there immediately. And we took the dog to Pune, took him to the vet. Long story short, the dog recovered. We had to put him on IV. We stood there for 2 hours. My father also stood there. I remember, so that was the fourth name I was forgetting, Dr. Sheikh the vet. So along with Hussain, Zohair and Hasina was Dr. Sheikh the vet, who was very dear to me. He's still there. He's still someone I visit every Diwali to wish him, because he's looked after our dogs for the last 20, 30 years. And so while we all stood in the little clinic of Dr. Sheikh, so did my father. Similarly, I remember my brother and I used to always like to ride two-wheelers. Unfortunately, in those days, now this my father won't like, but Bajaj made very sissy two-wheelers, Like there's this bike called the M50 that would barely move, especially when guys our size sat on it. So Sanjeev and I were driving around the colony, chasing each other. And he fell off. And he must have had some kind of a concussion or something, because he threw up, which is not supposed to be a good sign. Again, my mother called up my father. He was there in a minute. And then he was okay. So I would say that growing up, it's not just that we were more intimate with mom. Father was also very much there. But I think things change when you start working. I always say, I think it's a testimony to him much more than to me, because for me, I see it with my son now. It's easy for him to say whatever he wants to say. So nowadays he has picked up a new line, which is like his Brahmastra, to counter anything I ask him or anything I tell him. And that line is only 3 words: for what joy. So anything I tell him to do, not to do, anything I ask him, he say, for what joy. So that's it, that's the end of the conversation. So it's very easy for the child. I have learnt now by experience, when the shoe is on the other foot. So for my father, obviously, it was, I think, very hard to deal with somebody like me, who wanted to do things in a certain way, which was different from the way it was being done. But yet at the same time, I think somewhere he saw the merit of it. Because ultimately I could only do it because he allowed me to do it. How else could I have done it? Today it's different. He's 81, I am the MD of the company. But I am talking about 90s. So he was very much in charge at that time. I was in my mid-20s. So without his approval, I could not have. So I often tell my son now that for things he wants to do, I said, you don't have my approval, but you have my permission. Because I know he's going to do it anyway. So I say, you have my permission, but you don't have my approval. As in, I don't approve of it, but I will permit it. So I think that is kind of what happened with my father and me. So that is why I think whenever their anniversary was, I think 2011, I was not supposed to speak because I knew that I will get emotional talking about my mother. So other people were supposed to speak. I went up to greet her on stage and she said, no, you have to say something. I think that's how it happened. So I said, no, I don't want to say something because if I say something about her, I might choke. If I say something about my father, he'll choke me. My mother underwent bypass surgery 2004, Cleveland Clinic. So again, she was very strong. It didn't matter to her only. She went into it as if she's going to get her nails clipped or something. We were all like finished. And of course, my father is one of those proverbial people who are very tough outside, but they are really bhendi inside. So for him, for his wife to go into surgery, I mean, he was like totally shattered actually. But of course, he kept his composure. Both sides are there. And then, of course, she came out of it very well and all that. But obviously, he had internalized this stress enormously. And there was a whole lead up of several months. So obviously, he had internalized it much more than any of us realized that he has. Because outwardly, he looked fine. So once she was moved into her normal room in the hospital and all, then I was to fly back. Then when I went, I hugged my mother and all. But there was no great emotion because she was okay. All enough Runa Dhuna had all happened when she was taken away, brought back, all that, first 2 days and all that. So everybody was very calm, happy that she's fine, now she's fixed and everything. So I said bye to her nicely and all. And I left her room. So my aunt was there and my father was there. So I was going. And it was 2004, father-son war was at the peak, business related, at the peak that time. So I felt that I should say bye to him also. I should not just walk off like this. It's not like we are not talking or something that I should walk off like this. So I just turned around and I said, okay, I'll go. So he came to me, he hugged me. He put his... He cried and cried and cried. Yeah, so that was also a moment not to be forgotten, so to speak. So it happened like that time. Once it happened. Happens. But I was surprised because I never realized that he was so affected that my mother was not well. And I never see. Sometimes they say you see the parent as a child, no? So that's when I saw that. He's a little shorter than me. So his head was on my shoulder that time. Different experience.